I had led men into worse ground than the Nuran Pass, and I had led them out again, and I want that on the record before I tell you the rest, because a man ought to say plainly what he was before he tells you how wrong he turned out to be. My name is Ray Bishop. In the winter I am telling you about I was a senior chief and the element leader for a SEAL troop working the high country above combat outpost Sable, and I was good at it. Not lucky. Good. I had 11 years in the teams by then, and I had buried enough of that time to know the difference between a hard night and a bad one, and I trusted my own read of a piece of ground the way other men trust their hands. That trust had kept my men breathing. It had also, I will admit now, made me deaf in a way I could not hear at the time. We were staging a resupply run the last week of the cold season, a short column, 4 vehicles, up the spur road that climbed out of the valley floor and threaded the Nuran defile before it reached Sable, which sat alone on a shelf of rock a day's walk from anything friendly. Sable was low on everything that mattered and had been for a week. The weather had grounded the birds, so it fell to ground movement, and it fell to us to shepherd it, and I had my 4 vehicles and my men and a plan I liked. What I did not like was the woman they gave me. She came down from the Tactical Operations Center the afternoon before the run with a duffel over one shoulder, and a rifle case in her other hand and orders that said she was attached to my element for the movement as a liaison, movement control and language, the paperwork said, which in my experience meant a headquarters passenger who would need looking after and would slow me down and would, when it counted, be a body I had to account for that could not account for itself. I read the orders twice standing in the cold, and then I looked at her. She was maybe 35. Hard to say. She had the kind of face weather works on, brown and still, with fine lines at the eyes that could have come from squinting or from laughing, and I would have bet on the squinting. She was not big. She stood the way still people stand, without shifting her weight, without filling the silence, and I mistook that for meekness the way you mistake the surface of deep water for shallow because it isn't moving. Her uniform was plain. No tab I cared about, no swagger, nothing on her that told me she was anything but exactly what the paper said she was, which was a clerk with a language qualification riding my column to Sable and back. "Senior Chief Bishop," she said. "That's me." "Vega," she said, "I'm your liaison for the run." I read the orders. I did not offer my hand, and she did not seem to expect it. "You've done convoy movement before." Some. I let that sit. Behind me I could hear my men loading the trucks, the flat metal sounds of ammunition cans and the low, easy talk of professionals who were not worried, and I wanted to be over there with them and not here doing arithmetic on a passenger. "You'll ride the rear vehicle," I told her. "Truck 4. You'll keep your head down, you'll stay off my net unless I call you, and if it gets loud you do exactly what the vehicle commander tells you and nothing else. We clear." Something moved across her face and was gone before I could name it. Not offense. Closer to patience. The patience of somebody who has heard a thing many times and has stopped bothering to correct it. "Clear, Senior Chief," she said. I should have read that. I have replayed it more nights than I will tell you, that flat patient look, and every time I want to reach back into the cold and shake myself by the collar. But that afternoon I read it as a headquarters clerk knowing her place, and I felt the small, ugly satisfaction of a man who has put a problem where it belongs, and I turned my back on her and went to my trucks. That is the disrespect if you want it named plainly, and this niche of memory demands it be named. I did not strike her. I did not sneer at her in front of the men, not that first day. What I did was quieter, and I have come to think worse. I decided what she was before she opened her mouth, and then I built a little box around her out of that decision. The rear truck off my net, head down, and I locked her in it. And I told myself I was being a professional when I was only being certain. Certainty is a comfortable place to be wrong from. The rifle case bothered me, and I let it bother me all evening. It was a long, hard case, the kind that carries a real weapon and not a headquarters carbine, and when she'd set it down to sign for a cot in the transient tent, She had set it down the way you set down something you know the weight of exactly. I noticed and I filed it under headquarters affectation. Some staff people love their gear the way accountants love a good pen. And I did not think about it again until the following gray morning when we were staging in the motor pool and one of my younger men, a good shooter named Petty Officer Cody Lund, wandered back toward Truck 4 out of curiosity and came forward again with his eyebrows up. "Senior Chief," Lund said quiet, "the liaison's got a bolt gun back there, real one." She was checking the action. "Everybody's got a hobby," I said. Lund grinned because I'd said it dry and my men laughed at dry things, and that was the end of it, and I want you to see how easy it was, how a single dismissive line from a man they trusted closed the subject for all of them. That is a thing I understand now that I did not understand then. The men take their read of a person from the leader the way a compass takes north from the earth. I had called her a passenger, so she was a passenger. Lund had brought me a fact, a scout sniper's rifle, cleaned and cased and cared for, in the hands of a woman I'd stuffed in the rear truck, and I had turned the fact into a joke, and the joke had swallowed the fact whole. She heard the laugh. I know she did, because when I glanced back down the line she was standing by Truck 4 with the case open on the tailgate, and she did not look up at us, and she did not color, and she did not close the case in a hurry the way an embarrassed person would. She finished what she was doing. She ran a bore snake through the barrel, checked it against the gray light, seated the bolt, closed the case, and stood with her hands loose at her sides looking up the spur road toward the mouth of the pass with an attention I mistook for idle. She wasn't idle. She was reading the ground. I know that now. She had already, standing in a motor pool at dawn, begun the work I would spend that night watching her finish, and I had looked right at it and seen a clerk daydreaming. We rolled out at first light with the frost still on the wire. The spur road climbed for 3 miles through open country before it reached the defile, and open country is where I do my thinking, because open country is where nothing can surprise you, and a man can afford to plan for the place where things can. The Nuren Pass was that place. It was a narrow throat of a thing, a mile and change of road pinched between 2 rising walls of rock and stunted timber, with the ground on either hand climbing away steep into shadow even in daylight, and it was the only way to Sable that a wheeled vehicle could take, and everyone who had ever driven it knew all of that, which was exactly the problem. A choke point is only dangerous because it is obvious. The enemy does not need to be clever to use the Nuren. He only needs to be patient. So I had a plan for the Nuren, and it was a good plan, and I ran it the way I'd run it a dozen times. I pushed my lead vehicle out ahead as a scout with 2 of my best men in it. I put the resupply trucks in the middle. I took the trail vehicle myself with Truck 4, Vega's truck, tucked in behind me where I could keep an eye on my passenger. We would hit the mouth of the pass a little before dusk, which I did not love, but the alternative was to lay up short of it in the open all night, and I liked that less. I would rather be moving through the bad ground than sitting still beside it. That was doctrine, and it was also temperament, and I have wondered since whether it was the right call. I think it was. I think the ambush would have found us either way, but a man wonders. We came up on the mouth of the defile in the failing light, with the walls going blue-black above us, and the timber on the slopes losing its edges. And that was when Vega broke the one rule I'd given her that mattered. She came up on my net. "Senior Chief, this is Vega." Her voice was even, unhurried, no stress in it at all, which is why it took me a second to place who it was. "Recommend we hold at the mouth and put eyes on the high shoulders before we commit the column. There's a spur of good ground about 400 meters up on the left wall, above the second bend. If I were setting an ambush on this road, that's where I'd put my support weapon." I remember the exact quality of my irritation. It was not hot. It was the cold, flat irritation of a busy man interrupted by someone he has already filed as irrelevant, and it made me curt in a way I am not proud of. "Vega, this is Bishop. I told you to stay off the net." A pause, not a hurt pause, a considering one. Understood. Sending it once because it matters. That left shoulder above the second bend. Please put a set of eyes on it before the lead vehicle passes the first bend. Truck 4, keep your liaison off my net, I said, not even to her now, to her vehicle commander, talking past her the way you talk past a child at a table of adults, and I heard the small, ugly satisfaction in my own voice and did not examine it. We've run this road. I've got it. Everybody push it up, we're committing to the pass. And we committed to the pass. I want to be fair to the man I was, because self-flagellation is its own kind of lie and this niche has no use for it. I was not being reckless. I had run the Neuran before. My scout vehicle was forward. My men were alert. The read she'd handed me, the left shoulder above the second bend, was a good read. But it was the kind of good read a competent officer produces from a map. And I had a dozen competent officers' worth of good reads in my own head, and no reason on God's earth to believe that the headquarters clerk in Truck 4 had a better eye for that ground than I did. Everything I knew told me she was a passenger. Nothing I knew told me she was the best pair of eyes on that piece of country, by a margin I could not have imagined. That is the whole trouble with knowing things. It fills the space where finding out would go. We passed the first bend in the last of the light. The walls closed in. The road turned to a pale ribbon between the black timber, and the temperature dropped the way it drops when the sun quits the rock, and my breath started to show, and my lead vehicle called that it was through the first bend and rolling clean toward the second, and for the length of maybe 4 heartbeats the Neuran Pass was as quiet as a church. Then the left shoulder above the second bend opened up, exactly where she'd said it would, and the night came apart. I have been in ambushes. You learn a grammar for them, a set of sounds and instincts, and the grammar is what keeps you alive in the first 3 seconds before your mind catches up. The heavy machine gun on the left shoulder spoke first, a deep hammering that was not the sound of a rifle but the sound of a saw, and I knew from the volume and the angle that it was firing down into the column from height and from close. And I knew before I could have told you how I knew that my lead vehicle was already in trouble. It was. The saw walked across the road and found the scout truck at the second bend, and the truck slewed and stopped. And then the slopes on both sides came alive with rifle fire, muzzle flashes stitching the dark on the left wall and the right. And something came off the high ground trailing sparks and struck the lead vehicle, and lit the defile up orange for one long terrible second. And in that second of orange light, I saw the whole shape of it, and understood that we had driven into the throat of a thing that had been waiting for us with more patience and more men than I had let myself believe the Neuran could hold. Contact left, RPG. That was Lund forward. Then the net was a scramble of voices, my men's voices, hard and fast and not yet afraid but close to it, and I was out of my vehicle and into the ditch on the right side of the road with my rifle up, and the machine gun on the left shoulder was raking the length of the column at its leisure, and I could not see it. That was the thing. It was up and back in the timber, and it had the road, and I could not find it to kill it, and every few seconds it would hammer down another burst, and I would hear it strike metal, and I would hear a man call for a corpsman. And I understood with a cold falling feeling in my chest that we were pinned. Not losing, not yet, but pinned, which in that ground was the first station on the way to losing, because a pinned column in a defile is a column the enemy gets to take apart at whatever speed he chooses. He had the height, he had the fire, he had the only 2 exits. And he had numbers. I could hear it now. The volume of the rifle fire building on both walls, a coordinated volume that did not come from a handful of men taking pot shots, but from a force that had rehearsed this and had been given time to do it right. Somewhere in the first 90 seconds, one of my men got the words out over the net that I have not been able to unhear since. It was one of the forward 2, one of the men in the scout vehicle, and his voice cracked on it the way a good man's voice will crack once and then never again. We're surrounded. Bishop, we're surrounded. They're on both walls. We can't. We're surrounded. And they were. I could not tell him otherwise. I lay in a cold ditch with the muzzle flashes crawling down both sides of the world and my column burning at the second bend. And I did the fastest, hardest math of my life, and every answer came up the same. And the answer was that I did not have a way out of the Nuran that did not cost me most of my men. And I keyed my net to tell them to consolidate on the trucks and fight and pray, because that was all I had. That was when I noticed truck 4 was empty. I want to stop and tell you what I felt when I saw the open door of the rear vehicle and the space where my passenger was supposed to be, because it is not to my credit, and I have promised myself I would tell this straight. I felt anger, not fear for her. Anger. In the middle of the worst 90 seconds of my professional life, my first clean thought about Vega was that the clerk had panicked and bolted into the dark and gotten herself lost, and that I would now, on top of everything, have to account for a dead headquarters passenger when the sun came up, if any of us were alive to see it. That is what I thought. I had filed her so completely under helpless that even with the evidence of that cased rifle sitting in my own memory, even with her voice on my net calling the ambush before it sprang, my mind reached first for the story where she was a liability who had made my night worse. I keyed the net to raise Truck 4's commander and ask where in hell his liaison had gone. I never got the words out, because up on the left shoulder above the second bend, up where she had told me, in that even unhurried voice, that she would put her support weapon if the pass were hers to defend, the machine gun that had my whole column pinned fired one more long burst into the dark. And then from somewhere higher and further left than the gun, out of ground I had written off as empty timber, a single rifle shot rolled down the defile. Flat, deliberate, unhurried. A different sound entirely from the saw, from the crackle of the ambush, from the panic on my net, a slow, certain, spaced sound, the sound of a person who has all the time in the world. The machine gun stopped. It did not stutter and resume the way a gun stops to change a belt. It stopped the way a thing stops when the hand that runs it is no longer there. The deep hammering that had owned the Nuran for 2 minutes simply ceased, and into the ringing space where it had been, that same flat rifle spoke once more, and somewhere on the left wall, a muzzle flash that had been winking at us went dark and stayed dark. I lay in my ditch with my thumb still on the net key and no idea in the world what I was hearing. The rifle spoke a third time. I had my head up over the lip of the ditch now, against every instinct that had kept me alive, because the thing happening up on the left wall was so contrary to the grammar of an ambush that my body wanted to see it before my mind would believe it. An ambush is a machine designed to do one thing to you, and the one thing is take away your choices. And for 2 minutes the Nuran had been taking mine away with brutal efficiency. Now something up in the dark timber was reaching into the machine and pulling pieces out of it, one deliberate piece at a time, and the machine was starting to make the wrong sounds. I heard a man shout on the left shoulder, not one of mine. The language was wrong, and the shout had a question in it, and the question had fear underneath it. Then the flat rifle answered the question and the shouting stopped. "Bishop, this is Lund." My forward man, his voice tight but climbing back up out of the panic now, reaching for the discipline. "Somebody's shooting from up top, left wall high behind the gun position. Their senior chief, they're killing the ambush, from inside it." "I hear it," I said. My own voice came out steadier than I felt. "Everybody hold your fire high left. Hold high left. That's—" I did not have a word for what that was. I did not want to say the word that was forming because the word was a woman's name and the name belonged to a passenger I had stuffed in the rear truck. And even now, even with the evidence rolling down the walls of the defile in flat space shots, some stubborn certain part of me did not want to give her the thing my own eyes were handing me. "Hold high left," I said again. "That's friendly." I have thought a great deal since about how long it took me to say that word. Friendly. About the 2 full minutes I lay in a ditch and let my men fight and die a little while the answer to all of it worked alone in the dark above me, because I had built a box around her at a motor pool and could not, even now make myself take her out of it. That is the disrespect finishing its work. It does not end when the reveal starts. It clings. It makes a man slow to believe the thing that is saving his life. But I said it, hold high left, that's friendly, and up on the wall the flat rifle went to work in earnest. Let me tell you what she actually did, because I have spent years since putting it together. From what I saw, from what my men saw, from the ground we walked in the morning light, from the few flat words she gave me later when I finally had the sense to ask. I want you to understand that there was no miracle in it. I have heard men tell this story secondhand and turn it into something with a miracle in it, a lucky shot, a woman touched by God, and every time they do I want to stop them, because the truth is better than the miracle, and the truth is that she was simply, methodically, overwhelmingly better at this than anyone I had ever seen, and she had done all her real work before she fired a single round. While I had been committing my column to the pass, waving off her reed, she had been counting. She had marked the left shoulder above the second bend as the support weapon position from the map in the ground, and she had been right. But she had done more than that. From the rear truck, riding into the defile, she had been reading the slopes the whole way in the folds of dead ground, the places a man would climb to, the natural firing positions the terrain offered up to anyone who knew how to ask it. When the ambush sprang, she had not panicked and she had not frozen and she had not looked to me for orders. She had gone out the door of truck 4 into the dark with her rifle and a spotting scope, and a plan she had built silently while I told her to keep her head down, and she had climbed. She did not go toward the fight. That was the first thing, and it was the thing an amateur never understands. She went up and left and back, away from the road, into the empty timber above and behind the enemy's own support gun. The ground I had glassed once and written off as nothing. The ground she had known was something because she had been reading the whole pass as a problem to be solved, while I read it as a road I had driven before. She got herself above the machine gun. And then she used the flash-to-bang of the fight itself to build her picture. Every muzzle flash on both walls a marker she logged, every burst of bearing, the whole enemy ambush lighting itself up for her in the dark, telling her where every one of them was, because that is what an ambush must do to work. It must fire, and firing is a light in the dark, and she read the lights the way you and I read a printed page. The machine gun first. It was the piece that had us pinned, so it was the piece she took first. 1 round for the gunner. When the assistant tried to take the gun, 1 round for him. When a third man crawled to the gun, because they were disciplined too, these men, they had rehearsed this, 1 round for him. And after the third man, no one crawled to the gun again. And the deep saw that had owned the Neuron was silent for good, and it had cost her 3 rounds and about 40 seconds and not 1 particle of luck. Then she started on the walls. Senior Chief, the guns down, the fire slacking on the left. Lund again, and now there was something new in his voice, a rising thing I recognized because I had heard it in my own chest, the thing that comes into men when the machine that was going to kill them starts, impossibly, to break. Whoever's up there, they're walking the left wall. The flashes are going out, 1 at a time. Senior Chief, they're going out 1 at a time. They were. I watched it happen. I lay in my ditch with my rifle useless in my hands, having been told to hold high left by my own mouth, and I watched the left wall of the Neuron Pass go dark position by position, and there was a rhythm to it that I will hear in my sleep until I die. The flat-spaced report from up high. A pause. A muzzle flash somewhere on the wall going dark. Another pause longer, and I understood the long pauses later. They were her moving, always moving, never firing twice from the same place, so that the enemy could never build a picture of her the way she had built one of them. Report. Pause, dark. Report. Pause, dark. She was doing to them exactly what they had done to us, taking away their choices, except she was doing it alone, in the dark, uphill, against a force that outnumbered her by God knows what margin, and she was doing it without haste. That was the thing that unmanned the enemy in the end, I think. Not the accuracy, though the accuracy was total. It was the tempo. There is nothing more frightening on a battlefield than an enemy who is not in a hurry, because an enemy who is not in a hurry is an enemy who is certain, and certainty is contagious in the worst way. It drains out of the men who have lost it and pools in the man who hasn't. The enemy commander was not a fool. He understood after the first 4 or 5 that he had a shooter above and behind his own position, and he did the correct thing, the thing doctrine would tell him to do. He shifted his men to deal with the threat from the high ground, pulling fighters off the road to face uphill and left, hunting her. And she had known he would. She was already gone from where he sent them. She had read 3 moves ahead of him the way she'd read 3 moves ahead of me at the mouth of the pass. And when his men climbed to where her last shots had come from, they climbed into empty ground, and the flat rifle spoke from somewhere else entirely, from a position that took them in enfilade as they climbed, and I heard the enemy fire change its character. Heard it stop being the confident, coordinated volume of an ambush, and start being the ragged, scattered fire of men who have lost the initiative and know it. There was a moment in the middle of it I have to tell you about, because it is the moment I stopped being able to lie to myself, and a man should mark the place where that happens. My corpsman, a good young sailor named Tomas Reyes, had gone forward in the first minutes to reach the wounded in the scout vehicle, and he had gotten pinned in the open on the road between the second bend and my position, flat behind the low spine of a culvert with rifle fire chewing the dirt around him, unable to go forward, unable to come back, and a wounded man in the scout truck calling for him the whole time. I could not get to him. Anyone who tried to cross to him would die doing it. I had already stopped one of my men from trying. Reyes was going to lie there behind that culvert until either the fire slackened or a lucky enemy round found him, and we all knew it, and there was not one thing I could do about it, and the helplessness of it was the worst thing I have ever felt with a rifle in my hands. Up on the wall she saw it too. I know she saw it because of what happened. There was a fighter working down the right wall, the opposite wall from where she was, the hard shot, the long cross corridor shot down the length of the defile in the dark, and he was working into a position from which he would have had Reyes cold behind that culvert, a plunging angle the culvert could not protect against. I saw the man moving. I saw where he was going. I saw what it meant for Reyes, and I could not stop it, and I opened my mouth to shout a warning that would have done nothing. The flat rifle spoke once, from the far wall, across the whole width of the kill zone, and the fighter above Reyes came off the rock and did not move again. She had taken the hardest shot on the field, the long cross shot in the dark, uphill to downhill across the defile, not to break the ambush, not for the tactical picture, but to save one pinned corpsman she had never met and owed nothing, a man whose name she did not know, because he needed it and she could make the shot, and that was, for her, the entire beginning and end of the matter. She gave it to him freely, and then, having spent that shot on mercy, she went back to the methodical work of taking the pass apart, and the tempo never changed, and I lay in the dirt and felt the certainty I had carried into the Nurhand. The certainty about her, about what she was, about what I knew, drain out of me completely and leave nothing behind but a kind of awe I did not have the right to feel and could not help feeling anyway. Reyes got to his wounded man. He lived. He is a physician's assistant in Ohio now, with children. I think about that shot, the one across the defile in the dark, more than I think about almost anything else from that night, because it was the shot that had no tactical reason and every human one, and it told me more about her than all the rest of it put together. The reveal, when it came over the net, and it came because of a man in my forward vehicle who knew something the rest of us didn't. His name was Petty Officer Silva, and before he came to the teams he had done a tour in a joint task force where the ground truth of a whole hard sector had rested for one long season on a single Marine Scout sniper working nights. A shooter the task force had known only by a call sign. A shooter half the men out there had believed was a story the command invented to keep the enemy nervous, because no one flesh and blood could be in as many places on as many nights as this shooter seemed to be. Silva had never seen her. Almost no one had. That was the point of her. But Silva had heard her work night after night over the net and across the valleys, and there was a rhythm to how she worked that a man did not forget once he had heard it. The spaced flat certain tempo, the way she was never where the enemy corrected to, the way the fire went out one position at a time and never came back. Silva keyed the net in the middle of the Nurand, and his voice was strange, thick, the voice of a man seeing a ghost he'd stopped believing in. Senior Chief, I know that shooting. I know that I heard that in Al-Sarek 3 years back. That's not a shooter, that's the shooter. That's Nightjar. Senior Chief, that's Nightjar up there. The name meant nothing to me and everything to half my element. I heard it land on the net, heard the small sounds men make when a story they'd filed as impossible walks up out of the dark and starts saving their lives. Nightjar, a bird that hunts in the last of the light and the whole of the dark, that no one sees, that you know only by the sound it makes when it's already past you. I did not know, lying in that ditch, that the call sign belonged to a Marine gunnery sergeant with more confirmed work on the books than most sniper platoons put together. A shooter who had been pulled off the line after a tour that had cost her more than the citations ever said, and quietly parked in a liaison billet. A billet that put her in a motor pool at dawn with a cased rifle, riding a resupply column to Sable in a rear truck, under a senior chief who told her to keep her head down. I did not know all of that yet. What I knew in the moment was that the passenger I had benched was the shooter my men spoke of in the voice you use for legends, and that she was, at that moment, alone in the dark timber above the Nuran Pass, methodically breaking an ambush that should have killed us all. I keyed the net. I did not tell anyone to keep her off it. All stations, this is Bishop. Hold high left and high right. Consolidate the wounded on the resupply trucks. Our overwatch has the walls. I stopped. I had never in my life reported that a single attached shooter I dismissed as a clerk had command of a battlefield I could not hold. I found that the words came anyway and that they were true, and that I was, for the first time since the ambush sprang, not afraid. Nightjar has the walls, I said. Let her work. She worked for another 20 minutes, and the ambush that had planned to erase us in the Nurand came apart in her hands. I will not pretend I saw all of it. Most of what happened in those 20 minutes happened in the dark timber on ground I never set foot on, between her and men who had come to that pass certain they would go home and did not. But I saw the shape of it, and the shape was this. An enemy force that had held every advantage at the start, height, numbers, surprise, the 2 exits, the pinned column losing all of it, one advantage at a time, to a single shooter who conceded them nothing and made them pay for every position they tried to hold. She never let them find her. She never fired twice from the same place. She read every correction they made before they made it, and was gone from the ground. They came to and waiting in the ground they were forced into. She turned their own ambush inside out until the hunters were the hunted in their own kill zone, and somewhere past the 30-minute mark, the enemy commander made the last decision available to a man in his position, which was to break contact and pull his surviving men off the walls and out of the pass into the high country, and the fire on both walls guttered out, and the Nurhand went quiet. It went so quiet. I remember that most of all. After the saw and the crackle and the flat-spaced rhythm of her rifle, the silence came down on the defile like snow, and into it came the small human sounds of my element still being alive, the corpsman working, a man swearing softly with relief, the tick of cooling metal on the burning scout truck, somebody laughing once, high and cracked, the way men laugh when they have decided at the last second not to die. I got my count. It was better than it had any right to be. I had wounded, some of them badly, and I had lost 2 good men in the first orange seconds before she'd climbed high enough to change the arithmetic, and I will carry those 2 the rest of my life. But I had an element. I had a column. I had men who were going to see Sable and then see home, and every one of them owed it to a woman who was, at that moment, walking down out of the dark timber with a rifle slung across her back and a spotting scope in her hand and her breath showing in the cold, unhurried, composed. exactly as still coming down the slope as she had been standing in the motor pool at dawn. The first light found us regrouping at the second bend, and it was in that gray light that the thing this story is really about finally happened, which was not the shooting. The shooting was proof. What mattered was what the proof made the rest of us do. She came in off the slope and my men made way for her. Not one of them spoke. They had heard her work all night and now they watched her walk in out of it, small and weathered and calm, with the cold light coming up behind her. And there was on every face the same thing, the thing I had refused her at the motor pool, the thing I had refused her at the mouth of the pass, the thing I had been slow to give her even as she saved my life. Silva came to attention. Then Lund. Then down the line, one man at a time, the way she'd taken the walls one position at a time. My whole element came to attention in the gray light of the Nuran Pass, and stood, and it was the most complete and forced and honest respect I have ever seen men give, because it was given to someone half of them had laughed at 18 hours before on the strength of one dry line from me. I want to tell you I led it. I didn't. I was the last. I was the senior man on that ground, and I was the last one to come to attention, because coming to attention meant admitting, fully and finally and in front of my men, that I had been wrong in every way a leader can be wrong about a person, that I had read the deepest water on that battlefield as the shallowest, that I had put the best soldier I had ever served with in the rear truck and told her to keep her head down, that the box I built around her at the motor pool had been built out of nothing but my own certainty, and that certainty had nearly killed us all. She stopped in front of me. She was not gloating. There was nothing in her face but a kind of tired steadiness, the look of a professional at the end of a long piece of work. She waited. She did not make me do it, and she did not let me off it either. She just stood there in the cold and let me be the last man to come to attention and gave me the room to do it. I came to attention. I brought my hand up and I held the salute, and my voice, when I found it, was not steady. "Gunnery Sergeant," I said, because Silva had got me her rank by then and I would not call her liaison, would never call her liaison again as long as I lived. "I put you in the last truck." "You did, Senior Chief," she said. "Even, no edge on it." "I told you to keep your head down." "You did." I was wrong. The words came out of me like something being set down after being carried too far. About all of it. I was wrong about you from the first minute, and I made my men wrong about you too. And it nearly, I could not finish it. I did not have to. She knew what it had nearly done. She had spent the night undoing it. She looked at me for a moment with those still eyes. And then she said the thing I have carried longer than any citation, any after-action report, any medal that came out of that night, the thing that told me who she had been all along under the liaison billet and the rear truck and my certainty. "It doesn't matter what you thought I was, Senior Chief," she said. "It only ever mattered what I was. The salutes for the men I put back on their feet. It was never for me." Then she shifted the rifle on her back and turned and went to check on the wounded, because there was still work, and the work was the only thing she had ever been asking any of us to see. We got the column to Sable. We got the wounded to where the wounded needed to be. In the days after, the story of the Nuran went where those stories go, and the version that traveled was the version with the miracle in it, the ghost sniper, the lucky night, the woman touched by something. I spent a while trying to correct it, and then I stopped, because I understood that the men who needed the miracle version were welcome to it, and the truth was mine to keep, and the truth was better. The truth was that there had been no miracle. There had been a soldier who did her work, all of it, the reading and the counting and the climbing and the waiting, the whole invisible mass of it that happened before she ever fired a shot, and did it better than the rest of us could imagine doing it, and did it without display, and did it under a man who had decided she was nothing before she'd said a word. The truth was that the most dangerous person on that battlefield had spent the run to the pass being told to keep her head down by a senior chief who was so sure of what he knew that he could not find out what was true. I made senior chief because I was good at reading ground. I have never told anyone that the best night's soldiering I ever witnessed was done by the passenger I couldn't read at all. The still woman in the motor pool I filed as a clerk, who was reading the whole pass as a problem to be solved, while I read it as a road I'd driven before. She taught me the only thing that ever really changed me, and she taught it without meaning to, just by being what she was on a night when I needed her to be it and had earned none of it. Here it is, the whole of it, the thing I'd give the young ones if they'd take it from an old man. You do not get to decide what a person is and then make the world agree with you. The world does not care what you have decided. Sooner or later the ground goes dark and the fire comes down from both walls, and then you find out what people actually are, and the only thing your certainty bought you was being the last man in the pass to salute the one who came to save you. I was the last to salute her. I have tried every day since to be quicker,